last week. But we're really, really glad to have you here. And you know, I was thinking if anybody had told me at this point 5 years ago that I would be selling a book for Mike Bender in a bookstore, I would have thought they were out of their mind. And I'm guessing if anybody had told Mike he would be writing a book about the end of the Trump presidency, much less covering Trump as president, he would have said they were out of their minds. So it is a special treat to be here with both Mike and Gary Pana, who he's in conversation with tonight. You guys know these guys need no introduction. If you're getting one from me, I'm big fans of both of them, which is saying a lot for a retired political act. They are tough, but they are fair. Their writing is outstanding. Florida is a bit of a breeding ground for national reporters. So many people, Mary Ellen back from Boston and a Harvard fellowship. I mean, just so many amazing things Florida reporters do. Tom Flanagan could have gone anywhere if he wanted to, but fortunately he stayed with us. Skip Foster is in the back somewhere. The former publisher of the Tallahassee Democrats. We've got a tough crew for you tonight, a good group. Let me start with Gary. Gary, as you know, is now the author of Politico's daily Florida Playbook newsletter, and he tells me he has to get out of here on time because he's not written it for tomorrow.
I've written half of it.
He's written half of it. He has finished, the last 3 decades covering Florida politics, state government, the last 5 governors. He worked for the Associated Press, the Miami Herald, the Sarasota Herald Tribune, the Tallahassee Democrat, and his columns have also appeared in the New York Times. He grew up outside of Tampa. I didn't know you were a Floridian originally. That's great. And a crowd of Noel. He's a graduate of FSU. So very welcome. We're glad to have you here. Mike Bender is the senior White House reporter, as you know, for the Wall Street Journal. His coverage of President Trump has been recognized for its deep sourcing, balance, and valuable, incredible, crazy behind-the-scenes portraits of Trump's administration and presidential campaigns. It's sort of remarkable. If you've not read this book, you must start it tonight when you get home. He was recently awarded the Gerald R. Ford Foundation Journalism Prize for distinguished reporting on the presidency in 2019. And in 2020, he received the National Press Club Award for political analysis for a series of stories. Since 2000, he has covered local, state, and national politics in Grand Junction, Colorado, the Dayton Daily News, Palm Beach Post, Tampa Beach Times, Bloomberg News. He joined the Journal in 2016, and he has published more than 1,100 stories about Trump in the last 5 years. Quite a bit of material to cover, a lot of work to do. He's also served, you've seen him on CNN as an on-air political analyst. He was born and raised in Cleveland, graduated from Ohio State, and now lives in Washington with his fabulous wife and better half, Ashton Parker, also an amazing reporter. She is the Washington Post White House bureau chief, and they have 2 daughters. And his daughter, one of his daughters is here. He's ever riding around sometimes in the graphic novel section, I think. So, welcome you guys. Let us know if you need anything at all. Welcome to Midtown Reader. Glad to have you.
Well, I don't know why Mike reached out to me and asked me to talk to him, but I'm more than happy to do it. There were a brief moment in time we were competitors when he was primarily with the Times, I would say.
Palm Beach, yeah.
Yeah, and Palm Beach, but when you were with Bloomberg, you were into other rarefied territory. I do want to tell this one quick story. There was not the story where there was one story I was going to tell, but I'm not going to tell. No, there was. One of my favorite moments was, you'll remember this, is that Mike broke a pretty big story about Rick Scott, and it had to do with the fact that they had that his transition team had somehow lost all of their emails, and so Mike had done this gigantic story. He supposedly found the emails, and it had over 600 plus pages, 600, 800. It was a lot. It was a lot of pages, and again, Mike out in front of the story, and I start going through them. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to write about? I got to follow Mike. The AP wants the story. Lo and behold, about page 400 or 500, there's an email from Jeb Bush to Rick Scott. And basically, but there's nothing in it. It just says, it's just blank. And it indicates that there's an attachment. And so I go to Chris Kise and I say, what's up with that? There says there's an attachment here. I don't see an attachment. Oh, let me get it for you. He says, I don't know why it wasn't in there. It should have been in there. Right. Oh, amazing. And then I get the attachment, and it turns out it's a series of recommendations that Jeb Bush had made to Rick Scott about things he should do as governor. And so I wind up writing a story for AP. He comes in the next day and he's like, I swear, I looked through every one of those emails and I did not see that email. And so we had this conversation as to whether or not it was a deliberate effort by the Scott people to sort of trip him up, that the fact that they had, maybe somehow, and now Chris Kise, of course, denied that was the case. They didn't know why, that the attachment wasn't in there and everything like that. But I just remember that day. Yeah. It was one of the great moments where you had gotten the story and I was, but I just thought it was so funny because we, going through 600, 800 pages of emails and what have you. And the rest of the story is apparently, I found out years later, that apparently Rick Scott was apparently not pleased that Jeb sent him those lists of suggestions.
Also Jeb.
Yeah, I mean, not surprising, but it was apparently, it was like, as I was told to me, it was, well, why is Jeb Bush sending me recommendations on what to do as governor,
Yeah, I mean, well, God bless Florida's public records laws, and God bless Gary Fineout, no better reporter into the fine print, and to look for attachments than you. And I've definitely learned a lot watching you and following you over the years in Tallahassee.
Well, that's awful nice of you to say. I did want to, I know we're having a conversation, but I would like to talk to you a few things regarding your book. Mm-hmm. And if some of these things have kind of, hopefully I'm not being too cliched and asking you things that other people have asked you, but one of the things that did strike me.
Should I do read a little bit first?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, why don't you do that?
Should I take my mask? Can I take my mask off? Is that okay? Just so you can hear me. And I wasn't planning to read anything, and then Gary said he was going to tell a bunch of stories about me, so I'm going to read a few chapters. And just filibuster for a while here. I really, really do appreciate everyone coming out here. I'm so excited to be back in Tallahassee. I'm so excited that, and then to see you all here, now I'm extremely nervous. Thank you very much to Gary to agreeing to do this, and Sally for hosting me. I think it does say a lot that professionalism matters and still matters, no matter whether you're a journalist or a political operative or whatever you do. And then it's just very validating that for all of our kind of back and forths over the years, to be in a position now to be invited back is really exciting for me. And I do have my 10-year-old, I think my daughter Zoe, who's running around here somewhere, hopefully somewhere here.
This is a safe space. You don't have to worry about it.
She was born here in Tallahassee, and we left when she was 3. You guys might remember her as being like just the most adorable, little precocious, tow-headed little girl. And I can tell you that now she's. Just things about it. The incredibly smart, just most thoughtful. As when I was writing this book, it was a very stressful time for me, and she recognized that and would leave me notes of encouragement, not which were really helpful. So I'm glad she's here somewhere. Probably has her headphones in listening to Billie Eilish somewhere, but anyway. So I'm just going to read a little bit. I'm just going to jump right in here. On the afternoon of June 17th, this is 2020, the Wednesday before the Tulsa rally, my phone vibrated with a call from the White House. By the 3rd month of work-from-home orders, I was healthy but fully ensconced in lockdown mode. Face unshaven for 2 months and hair unsheared for twice as long, I wore a pair of grungy khaki shorts, tattered orange t-shirt from long ago family reunion. My afternoon coffee cup almost finished. I was hustling to file a front page story for the Wall Street Journal. This was the John Bolton book had just come out for my bedroom. The room my wife and I had once used almost exclusively for sleep now doubled as our cramped home office during the day, as well as sort of clandestine cafeteria where we regularly ate lunch in order to escape the grabby fingers of a toddler in our nanny chair on the 1st floor and not to disturb my then 9-year-old On the second floor, who was spending much of her summer synchronizing iPad games and FaceTiming with friends. Footnote, complicating matters, my partner, Ashley Parker, was also a competitor on the beat, covering Trump for the Washington Post. In full disclosure, I'm not totally sure she considers me a competitor. She's won a Pulitzer Prize, moderated a presidential debate, and scooped me every time we chased the same tip. She tells that story much more hilariously, which the White House call pierced the sanctuary of my bedroom turned workspace. Quote, any chance you could get to the White House, like now, said White House Communications Director Alyssa Farah. The president just asked for you. I quickly showered, slipped on a dark suit, and knotted a tie around my neck for the first time since March, my last day in the office. Within 30 minutes, I arrived at the north gate of the White House, where a staffer from the medical unit awaited visitors from inside a canvas tent. He checked my temperature, inquired about experiences I may have had with a list of symptoms, and waved me through. Inside the West Wing, the crew of young, unmasked White House press assistants mopped my long hair and bearded face. A military paramedic asked me to sign a consent form and told me a positive test, God forbid, would be relayed, quote, all the way up to POTUS. He held up a swab. I held my breath. As the machine that resembled a cross between a photo printer and a handheld credit card reader analyzed my nasal secretions, I sat in the West Wing lobby, frantically scribbling questions for the most powerful man in the world. After 20 minutes, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany appeared, flashed me a warm, wide, toothy smile. You saved the day, she told me. At the time, I wasn't sure what she meant. I interpreted her comment simply as an appreciation that I'd rushed over to the White House on a moment's notice, which was, in fact, the one thing I'd asked them not to do to me. 2 months earlier, when the president and Kellyanne had called me to dissect one of my articles, Trump had invited me to the White House for an interview. That sparked weeks of back and forth with McEnany and Farah over schedules, my request to bring other Wall Street Journal reporters with me, and whether we could have cameras in the room. But after more than a month of struggling to get answers on any of those questions, I ultimately treated to a single plea. Please don't call me in the middle of my work-from-home nightmare and give me a 5-minute notice. Yes, Farah had assured me. That's a completely reasonable request. But I had no time to quibble. More pressing was the question of why I had been so suddenly summoned. I interviewed Trump as a candidate in the corner office of his eponymous New York skyscraper as president on Air Force One and in multiple rooms of the White House. He knew me at that point, and we had a perfectly fine relationship. He liked that I worked for the Journal, a business-centered publication that has a reputation for playing with straight bat in its news pages. During an exchange in the Oval Office during Take Your Child to Work Day in 2017, Trump told my oldest daughter, Zoe, that I was an accurate reporter, quote, about 80% of the time. High praise from this president, though it perplexed my daughter, who later quizzed me about the other 20% of my work. But the key to my relationship with the president was that he admired my hair. I realized this during a flight to Air Force One on Washington after a rally in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as I and a few other reporters chatted with Trump in the press cabin of the plane. He was in a good mood, and as he usually is after 90 minutes of continuous affirmation, but still feeling his way through the new job and having a hard time hiring a press secretary. I have 10 people for every job, he said. Who wouldn't want it? I merely raised my eyebrows in doubt of his claim, but Trump seemed to possess a biological sonar that senses disapproval, like a bat bouncing high-frequency sound waves off nearby objects. The president picked up my subtle signal of skepticism and pivoted his 6'3" frame to face me. Would you take it, he asked me. It seemed like a joke, but you could never be too sure with Trump. In either case, there's only one answer. No, I told him. Trump smiled. You have that beautiful head of hair, he said, ogling the unruly auburn mop atop my head, which I wore long enough that it confused my buttoned-up grandfather, but delighted my more spirited and extroverted grandmother. My peers erupted in laughter. You take it in 2 seconds, the president said. That moment would define our relationship for the next 4 years. Even when he wanted to be upset with me, he'd remember he liked my hair, and his internal conflict over those competing emotions would save me from some of the vicious takedowns other reporters suffered at his hand. He verbalized it most clearly during an event in the Roosevelt Room of the White House in 2019. The staff was trying to escort reporters out of the room, and I kept asking questions. Sarah Sanders, then the White House press secretary, snapped at me, but Trump interrupted her. He's one of the tough ones, the president explained to the other officials in the room, but such beautiful hair. More than a year had passed since we last sat down. As McEnany and I walked to the Oval Office, she turned her head toward me. Do you know what you want to ask, she asked. News of the day or something, or some general topics I can tell him beforehand? What struck me was that her question answered my own. there was no particular message the president wanted to drive, or news his team wanted to break. There was no strategy for bringing in the Wall Street Journal senior White House reporter into the West Wing. The output from the next hour would be completely determined by what questions I wanted to ask and whatever was on the president's mind. Okay, McEnany said as we entered an otherwise empty Oval Office, we'll be with you in 60 seconds. I was then left alone in the Oval Office for the next 30 minutes. So,
yeah, one of the things I wanted, there's a couple things I did want to delve into. Let's since you brought it up, I first wanted to talk to you about sort of his relationship with the press.
mm-hmm.
And I found it fascinating, and maybe you could explain it more to me. I mean, obviously there are several different reporters that he seems to have good relationships with, or he would talk to and what have you. Yet at the same time, he goes out there and he just rips the press as enemies of the state and everything like that. I'm curious, in any of your interactions with you, did he? I mean, were you left with the impression that? I guess I don't assume. I assume it wasn't. That his enmity has some basis in reality. But I'm just kind of curious. Did it ever strike you this weird dichotomy between having this decent relationship with when you talk to him one-on-one versus the public image that he was pursuing?
You want me to explain the thinking behind what how Donald Trump behaves?
Well.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I'm totally kidding. It's a very legitimate question, and one that we struggled with in Washington. I think multiple across the press corps for quite a while on how to handle, because he clearly loves the press. I mean, he another favorite Floridian, Roger Stone, right? I mean, he and Stone both would rather be mocked and criticized than ignored, right? I mean, he invited not just me down to I went down to Mar-a-Lago twice for the book,
right?
And as did, I don't know, a
lot of
over there
reporters.
putting out, like, yeah, a dozen, 2 dozen, more authors than ever. But that's he knew where the books were going. He knew what that I was not going to write hagiography of him, and but again, he would rather he's kind of fine with that. I mean, he hates it, but he would rather be criticized than ignored or be viewed as irrelevant. In fact, a quick funny side note, I don't know how many people here know this, but he invited all the authors down, basically, except for one. Does anyone know what author he did not invite down? Bob Woodward. Right. Yeah, he was so pissed still about the book, the previous book, and the COVID and interviews and all that I truly believe that part of the reason he invited us all down was just as as a middle finger to Bob Woodward. So it's an interesting kind of decisions. And also I will say too, when it comes to the media, I think Trump was desperate to run the 2016 campaign in 2020. He wanted to do everything the same, and whenever it diverged, it really threw him for a loop that he couldn't really respond to or recover from. And as we know, there's almost nothing the same about 2020, right? From top to bottom, what we knew about Trump, what we expected from Trump, to say nothing of these cataclysmic, once in 100-year health crises, civil rights crises, economic crises, all happening in the same day. And but the one piece of it that was consistent was that people still hate the media, right? I mean, it was we are still super easy punching bags for any politician, right? And so going to that well over and over and over again, Trump saw results from that with his base, and he would continue to be an easy target, and a base that ignored the first part of it, that how much he loved the media and how much time he spent with the media,
right?
And just saw that as more reason to love him.
That's not the case with the occupant of the governor's mansion here. I think his dissatisfaction with the media is through and through. I did. So one thing I did want to that kind of really struck me is I'm gonna make sure I don't want to butcher this woman's name. The woman that you begin the book with, Sandra.
Yeah, Sandra Kaczynski.
Sandra Kaczynski.
Uh-huh.
And well, it's just interesting. So two things I thought. Well, first off, it's fascinating that she's there at the end.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the book, January 6th, you've got her. But what I wanted, so I'm curious as to when did you sort of, how did that all evolve? Was it that you went to these rallies and you met them and you just kind of, but I mean, it's intrigued to me that you were able to sort of continue to have conversations with them over the course of 4 years and continue to, and to be sort of relay that. And I was also curious as to whether or not at any point in time did you have some of them just say, like, well, they decided no, they didn't want to talk to you anymore because you were part of the media.
Yeah. So let me take a step back here a little bit. And part of the and give you my sort of explanation of this book. I mean, as Sally mentioned, I've written way too many stories about Trump, more than anyone should have to read or write. I don't want to write another Trump story. I don't want to read another Trump story. I sure as hell don't want to read a Trump book, right? But I was, I always had, been thinking about books to write. My first job in Colorado, maybe a book on Western Colorado politics. Like, how thrilling would that be? Obviously, Florida, there's no shortage of stories here. But when Trump happened, and I had a very meager offer to write a book on the campaign, it just felt like if I don't do this now, this is the most amazing, fascinating political story, certainly of my lifetime. Right. Then when, right? So I say that as I was very cognizant of writing a book that I wanted people to give people a reason to turn the page. So I worked really hard to get behind the scenes details of Oval Office, right? It drove some headlines on some of the first reports on Mark Milley and what the back and forth over debate over sending soldiers into the streets of the Capitol. Is the only book that goes under the hood of the 2020 campaign and kind of outlines why. It starts to outline why and how Trump spent twice as much as he did in 2016 and was still chasing Biden at the end. And then the thing that I was most proud of, and that I don't think any other Trump book has done to date in the pantheon of Trump books, is I effectively embedded for several years with Trump's most loyal supporters, folks that went to 30, 40, 50, and no joke, 60 Trump rallies, to understand them as people, as Americans, about what about them had them coming to see the same show over and over and over again, and particularly when that show was Donald Trump. Like, what was it about him and what about them that made them go and show up over and over again? So, I knew some of these people from the rallies. I mean, I'd gone to 50 rallies myself. I mean, of course, I was being paid to go there. But, but what would happen is you'd go to the front of the line, find the most enthusiastic Trump supporter, get the wildest quote you could about how AOC is really a secret Muslim and wants to destroy America from the inside, and write it down, put it in the story, put it on Twitter, hope that bounces around it, and that's it. So
sort of like your own version of Borat.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And then it was here in Florida, it was Orlando, in the summer of 2019, that Trump brought us all down for his campaign kickoff rally. Right. And we all know here, a kickoff is a specific word. It means a specific thing, right? It implies that there's going to be a reset, some kind of message to sort of to tee up the next year or 2 years. Maybe even crazy, like some vision for the next term, something new, right? And the Wall Street Journal sent 3 reporters, including our pal Alex Leary, who was any Times reporters here. we were recruited away from the Times. You know, we would send one reporter to a Trump rally, maybe none at that point, because it was the same thing. I mean, there was hundreds of reporters from around the country, around the world, who came down to this kickoff, and it was the same thing, right? And I was pissed. I was literally sitting there in my seat, right behind the riser, so you can't see the stage, and it's the same thing I'd seen a million times. I mean, not send her back. What was the Hillary chant?
Lock her up.
Thank you. Blocking it. Lock her up, right? Build the wall. All of the same things, not just from like the past year or two, but 2016. And I felt like I'd been, you know, hoodwinked, right? Like I fell for it, right? Trump had hyped it up, and I fell for it, and we were all there. And I was irritated, and as I was sitting there groveling and, you know, plotting my revenge, yeah, I looked around, and we're in the Orlando basketball arena, right? There's 20,000 Trump, every seat is filled, and not just filled, but like filled with people who are screaming at all these chants at the top of their lungs, right? They had stayed, and I realized like they had lined up for this, right? They knew this is what they wanted to see. This was like, and some of you may have been there, but it was summer in Central Florida, right? The oppressive humidity only interrupted by like pounding rain, right? So like people would come in like tired, wet, sweaty, and like excited to see exactly this. So I will say, like, this was my moment where I sort of said, like, you know what, there may be something to these Trump rallies in year like 5. But at that moment, what I sort of told myself was that like there is something happening here that is way deeper that you know, that a sort of member of the swampy White House press corps inside the Beltway is totally missed. And I had talked to some of the people at the front of the line, and I made a point like to go back to them afterward to talk to them about that rally, and then started meeting up with them ahead of rallies, right? I mean, Cincinnati, sat outside, you know, 10 o'clock at night the night before, and whatever, drank Busch Lights with them, and they offered me their like last sandwiches and whatever, like last smoke in their pack and stuff, and you know, and sort of did this at rally after rally to rally to rally. And wanted to tell their part of this book. And really, I mean, it grew out of the story from the Journal, but I wanted to tell their story as kind of where they came from and how they were seeing it. You know, and again, these are not the Proud Boys, right? This is not like the military wing. This is a very different circle in the Venn diagram of the Trump base. These are folks who were recently retired or almost retired, estranged from their families, or maybe didn't have kids, and had a lot of time on their hands, and they formed this little community where they'd seen each other at rallies. They had a kind of, you know, this political awakening. Some of these folks were the first ones to recognize the resonance of Trump, and they were right. Trump won. And I mean, they loved reliving election night 2016 at these rallies, blow by blow, just as much as Trump did. And they would stay at each other's homes on the road. They would share hotel rooms. A couple of them got married and then divorced. And you know, Sandra at one point called me up and said, you know, Mike, and you know, Sandra works at a Walmart. Right. She would go to rallies and use this kind of interesting app. I tried to tell the Wall Street Journal business reports about it, that like, offered odd jobs in towns. Like she would come to whatever, Nashville or whatever, and find, you know, who needed help, like cleaning up in a restaurant or moving boxes or that sort of thing. And she calls me and tells me, like, are you going to the Hamptons for Trump's fundraiser? No, Sandra, I'm not. And she said, well, I scraped together $2,800 for the ticket, but I can't quite afford the hotel. Like, if you're going to go there, you know, you want to split a hotel room with me. And Sandra, I really appreciate the thought, right? But like for a number of ethical and marital conflicts, I'm going to have to decline. So, you know, and I laced their story, like their lives became in a way fuller and bigger with Trump, in a way that you know, and then the story of 2020, like, and the story of this group is because their lives get narrowed, right? They're misled through the year. And
Although I thought it was fascinating that when you said that Sandra, after November 3rd, said she stopped reading news and only was getting information from Facebook.
yeah, that's what I mean. You know, once Fox correctly called the election, right? She turned Fox off. What had been the kind of background noise of her for 4 years for her, like not even that wasn't good enough. And then she, at that point, her news was exclusively from her Facebook feed, and that's what she was scrolling through. You know, after the January 6th rally, and like learned right then that Pence wasn't going to, you know, block certification of the results. And I said to her, Sandra, like, we've been reporting that for a while, you know.
Right.
The Journal, the Post, the New York Times, but like Trump hadn't been saying that. Like that's where her news was coming from, right? Another one, Libby, you know, Libby, why do you come back this over and over and over again? Well, how else would I know what was going on if I don't go and hear it from Trump?
Awesome. Well,
Keep going. You got another 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes. Keep going.
No,
and then we'll open it. No. Do another.
No, those were the main questions.
Those
Well,
are
I
the
do. Okay, I'll ask one last one. For the locals here. I know that you're in DC and everything like that, but if you could sort of just give me your take from Washington DC on what you're hearing about what people think about Ron DeSantis.
Yeah. Well, I should say the only reason Gary had one condition and agreed to do this was that I was not allowed to speak to any political operatives in Tallahassee when I got here. I was not allowed to leave with a story. But
That was a joke.
Well, no, I appreciate you. You know, your overestimation of my work ethic. So, what do they think of Ron DeSantis? I mean, that's a good question. You know, there is. He's fascinating, right? Like, I mean, he really is a fascinating character here as a politician. I've heard people wonder about the strategy he's deployed right now, and not necessarily critics, although it's hard to tell these days who's a critic and who isn't. But he's effectively running a Republican presidential primary, right?
He says he's not.
No, I said effectively. So when he has to win a governor's race, right? I mean, it's not that I think. Delete. I think. I mean, I don't know how much concern there is about like, you know, Charlie or Nikki beating DeSantis at this point. But Florida's still a close state, right? And I think I've heard people openly wonder, like, why risk it, right? I mean, DeSantis, you tell me if I'm wrong, I mean, DeSantis did seem to do himself some favor in public opinion when he took office and seemed to offer some olive branches to the middle, and it seemed to be pretty effective for him. So, you know, if you are the elected governor of a state like Florida in a convincing way, right, is a pretty powerful platform to run for president, if that should be maybe possibly something you would ever think about. But I mean, he's just like there's also an argument that he's just a creation of Trump, right? So where does that leave him? But you know, I will say, one of the, not to talk about 2016 too much, but the sort of that like Shakespearean drama here in Florida of 2016, I think he ain't seen nothing yet, right? The Jeb and Marco stuff. You know, over the next 2 years, you have, you know, Rick Scott running the NRSC, right, and the Republican Senatorial Committee, right?
Right.
Who's a little bit competitive, kind of got sharp elbows, can sort of come off that way, and Rubio running for re-election, and how much does he help Rubio in 2022? Val Demings is raising a lot of money. I don't know how competitive that race is going to be or is, but Val Demings is
tracing a lot of cash.
Right.
I think it's a concern to Rubio and his people, and I think he would like some help, more help from Rick Scott's people. And then you have the DeSantis stuff. Is he going to run against? Would he run against Trump? Would he? Has Trump endorsed him for 2022? Right? It's like so you have all this stuff happening. These things, races are happening in 2022, which brings us to 2024. And
Right.
And what does Trump do? Does DeSantis run against him? Like, is Rick Scott going to throw his hat in? Is anyone even talking about Rubio anymore? I mean, but I just think that those pieces, while not quite the, I mean, there was.
Well, and the fact that Trump is now a Florida man too.
Exactly. Well, yeah. No, that's what I mean.
So it's just, it's a fascinating dichotomy if in fact, all four of them somehow, but probably not. I mean, somebody's going to fall by the wayside.
I mean, if Trump runs, it's hard to understand what anyone's rationale for running is against him in the Republican Party, at least. Although DeSantis wasn't supposed to win the governor's primary, right? I mean, we're all pretty familiar with that, and so does that same sort of ambition and chutzpah to run against Putnam? I mean, it's a little different running against Putnam than running against Trump, but I think he's got it in him.
Yes, he's a confident individual. I will say that.
As a candidate,
There's anything,
yeah.
pushing himself out there.
I mean, Don Jr. when it comes to the Trump circle is like the closest thing he has to a Trump delegate, right? I mean, a Trump voter. I know he grew up in boarding school and Manhattan and all that, right? Like I'm not going to but there is this sort of kind of animal in touch with like his animal instincts. I mean, he would that brings him, I think, closer to the people. And then stop talking. But like he went and like hunt, right? He went to his maternal grandfather's house, spent his summers growing up in Eastern Europe on hunting and fishing, right? Like that stuff is not fake for him, right? And does give him a connection to a good size of the Trump base. He's been brought in closer. I mean, I think he's more of an he's sort of supplanted Jared's role post election. I think he would be thrilled to be asked to run.
He doesn't understand his personality.
I think he does have his dad's personality. He doesn't have his dad's credibility, right, with the base. I mean, he doesn't, right? Like he just doesn't have. He hasn't. He's just younger, right? I mean, he's a younger, less accomplished version of his father, which, like, who among us?
Can I ask you a question?
No. Next.
No comment.
Hey, John.
Hey, Mario. Yeah, I wondered your thoughts on Trump in the 2020 election. The mail-in ballot opposition to it and fraud. Was that early on was that his vision that he was going to lose this race and just planting the seed of fraud was early on? Because undoubtedly there were, some of his team must have said, we have to embrace mail ballots, right? I mean, that must have come up at some point.
Oh yeah, I mean, as a reporter that cut his teeth in Florida, right? Like, I mean, it just didn't compute that any Republican would complain about absentee and mail balloting, right? I mean, it was sort of stunning, and as you all know, I mean, the Florida contingent of that operation was not on board. No one was on board with that. No one was on board with what Trump was doing, and no one was in any position, who had any sort of significant title at White House or in the campaign was telling him that this was a good strategy. He was going to hurt turnout, right? I mean, this was nuts and bolts of campaigning, and I think what it was. I read a little bit about this in the book. I mean, he was just of that sort of generation where, because these conspiracy theories sort of came easily, and kind of sounded, if anything sounded suspicious to him, it was true, or it could be true. And I don't think he thought that he was going to lose. I think he thought he had something to lose, which was a big difference from 2020, right? I mean, which I think was when it comes to like the debates with Biden, right? Like what was different when he was debating Biden and versus Hillary, like he lost all that kind of charm, right? Like he always mocked opponents, right? Which made people kind of laugh. I guess Biden, like, this time he had something to lose and forgot all that, left all that, and was just kind of an asshole, right? And I actually think that is the biggest moment of 2020, single moment. But I don't think he thought he was going to lose. I think but the second part of your question I think is accurate in that he wanted to plant as many seeds of doubt just in case, right? And that because he would never lose. And he'd been promising us that for years, right? I mean, for 5 years as a candidate and in office, like he was always going to be acquitted. No other politician was to be trusted, and he would never fade away, right? I mean, even going back to whatever season of that was of The Apprentice, where he complained about losing an Emmy because of fraud, right? And so, like, this is all, like, it would never be his fault. Fast forward a year after the election, and we're still still dealing with the consequences. Mr. Dixon.
How do you, asking for a friend, juggle, in reporting out a book, juggle the idea of, well, I still have the other responsibilities, I still work for a massive news organization, things that you learn in this process, juggling versus your day-to-day stuff. What was that calculus like in your head in figuring out, this is something that's book-worthy, not necessarily Wall Street Journal-worthy? Yeah. What's that thought process like?
Yeah. I mean, I had to deal with this a lot when the book came out. I had a lot of reporting that, right, we all know the story of chaos, right? You don't have to be in the White House briefing room every day for the Wall Street Journal. If you have a phone, if you have a cable outlet, right, like or cable plan, that you see the signs of chaos. But what was striking to me when I went back and reported it was it wasn't that people inside the room were worried about the chaos or concerned about the chaos. They were concerned about how dangerous Trump had become in this desperation to hold on to office, right? And to get to your question, so these stories started coming out in the book that Trump was telling his top military officials to shoot Americans. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. Go out there, shoot them in the leg, shoot them in the foot, crack skulls. This sort of talk, and a lot of people. The pushback I got on that wasn't that it was not true. It was that, like, well, why didn't you report that at the time? And this was, I think, fallout from the Woodward book.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, the easy answer for me is, like, I didn't know these things in real time.
Right.
Like, I unlike Woodward, am employed by a daily newspaper. It wouldn't have even occurred to me to say something like that for the book, right? I mean, when you're going up against, like, the likes of Maggie Haberman every day, right? And I could go on and on and on. Like, really good reporters, really enmeshed in Trump world, like, it just wouldn't have even occurred to me to say that kind of stuff, right? But it was fallout from Trump or from Woodward. So I didn't really have that the luxury or that quandary, right? And some of those things, when I did learn them, I took leave. I took leave after the race was called in November, when I thought, like, things were over. Sure. I mean, it was harrowing, right? Like, I had taken leave. Unpaid leave, and writing a book it was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I wasn't getting paid a lot. I had to pay other people to help me, and, like, no one would talk to me. Like, November goes by, right? And it's like, well, wait, get to December 15th once the Electoral College meets. Then, like, that will loosen Trump up. And, like, all of us, right? Okay, December 15th comes, like, all right, well, like, January 6th happens. And then January 6th happens, and then it's just like everyone fucking disappears, you know? Like, and then it wasn't really until, it took a few weeks after that until I started getting people to sit down and to talk in any, like, length, for an hour or two, and, we can talk about the reason why, right? Like, people, I will say, what was striking to me was how willing people were to talk if it wasn't gonna come out the next day, right?
Yeah.
If the book was coming out in 2 months, 6 months, a year, like it didn't really, like those details didn't really matter. It was like a problem for their future selves, and they would deal with that later. Right now, they wanted to like make sure that like Corey wasn't the only one talking, or that that like Brad Parscale didn't, like they wanted their own versions. There was also like a kind of like therapeutic event or aspect of this where they couldn't really, the things that people were telling me like, bluntly were things that they didn't really, ways they didn't really speak to each other, I think. I did offer all the stuff that I had to the journal. First and foremost, they were interested in some of it, but anyway, we can talk about that more, but it's fine.
So you had all these, you were talking to all these Trump supporters, going to all these rallies, and you were having very professional curiosity about how they were doing everything. And they were coming out with a more personal interaction. Would you did any of them want to speak or talk to you after the events? And B, would you be able to put aside their beliefs and their ideologies for the fleeting relationships and friendships that they have with you?
So you mean like the rally goers or like the Trump administration?
The rally goers.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely, the book is very sympathetic to them. I mean, these are, they're not public officials. That's why, I wanted to, they're adults and they make their own decisions, right? But like, I don't feel like they are voluntarily putting themselves out there to, for me to judge them, right? And I wanted more to get past that. There's so much bitterness in our politics, right? There's so much, you're red, you're blue, you're wrong, you're stupid, right? And I wanted to get past that and sort of understand them as people, which is also what honestly interests me. I'm just not a very political person. I got into journalism and political writing because I like stories of the people, right? And with writing about the human condition, with the politicians we elect and how they pitch themselves and all that. That's what I like about my job. So it wasn't really I wanted to tell their stories and didn't really like push them too hard. I also wasn't testing their political beliefs, I guess we didn't spend that much time talking about AOC. We did talk about Trump, we did talk about COVID and those sorts of things, and I did have some of them call me and say, Mike, is it a hoax? Like, do you think, right? Like Libby, whose husband is struggling with cancer, right? And she doesn't want to go to the rallies, and where no one's masked, right? Or she's going to wear her mask, and suddenly her friends, right, are mocking her for wearing a mask, calling her a sheep, et cetera, and she's confused, right? And like turned to me, and it's like, do you really think, that this is real? Is it? Like, I think it is, but they're all telling me, and it's like, Libby, like you got to trust yourself here, right? Yeah, the people I'm talking to in the Trump White House at the National Security Council, right, are saying it's real. So I did have a handful of moments like that, and to sort of bring it full circle, like at the first rally back after January 6th, I caught up with a lot of them at that first rally in Cleveland in June, my birthday, in my hometown. And everyone made fun of me for wanting to go to a Trump rally my birthday in Cleveland. But, I wanted to catch up with these people and see how they were they were coming back after January 6th, right? Like I think that's what that I couldn't have imagined a year ago, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, writing this stuff was like how important it still is to understand the people who are still coming to Trump rallies, right? And we're together, we're talking, and talk about January 6th, it's Antifa, right? We heard about the vans, like vans of Antifa were coming, it wasn't us. And in a lot of ways, it wasn't them particularly, but, that kind of broke up, and one of them came back afterwards and said, do you think it was Antifa? Like, I don't know anymore. And I don't think there is. So, like, I'm not, you know, it was like, it was interesting, like, a year ago, this person would never have said that to me, would never have even entertained anything other than, like, the line from the stage in the rally. But it's interesting to me that, like, people were starting to have a little bit of doubt, or a little bit of skepticism about what they were hearing.
One last question, time for one more.
Thank you. I'm probably one of the few non-journalists in the crowd.
You get 2 questions on.
Actually, I have more than 2, but the one I really want to ask. In January 2020, the whole world was convinced that Donald Trump would get reelected. And obviously, as things played out, the way you wrote it in the book, there's the way he treated the pandemic, and the dysfunctionality among the White House, the RNC, and campaign people. Which of those do you think was more important in his losing?
Yeah, I mean, to start your question, like, people forget that. I mean, Trump had gotten impeached the first time, to be clear, and it was great for him. Most of the American people had turned against it. They thought it was a waste of time, a political charade, according to polls, right? I mean, it was gangbusters for fundraising. The economy was cooking, right? I mean, he did look like he was on the glide path to running. I have a scene in the book where he's on Air Force One and on all of it, like, the Democrats are falling apart. Mike Bloomberg goes up on stage and just gets dismantled. You know, the last, you know, moderate hope for the party gets dismantled pretty easily by Elizabeth Warren. Trump calls a bunch of reporters up to the front of the plane to rewatch that part of the debate, do play-by-play. I mean, he was delighted, right? And tells everyone as they're leaving, like, now you see, I'm gonna win, and now you see it. And I think he was right then. But what is he, you know, I mean, I mentioned that I do think that the October debate in Cleveland is the one single moment, if I had to point to one moment where, like, he just couldn't recover from. And as far as, I mean, Trump was, I will say, like, he was not well served by the people around him, right? I mean, there was so much backbiting, whether it was in the White House or the campaign or the RNC, that it's just hard to, you know, you can't ignore that. But it's hard for me to, like, pick which one was the worst, because, like, Trump put all these people in those places, right? And encouraged this. Which is a moment that became clear to me in 2017. I think it was the first interview we did in the Oval Office, me and some other reporters from the Wall Street Journal. I think this was in the middle of Scaramucci, Scaramucci's 11 days. And in fact, like, our photographer got this iconic shot of, while we were interviewing Trump, Scaramucci and Priebus glaring at each other on the couch that went, you know, wild on Twitter. It was awesome. But I had asked Trump about it, right? That all this backbiting, right? The Bannon versus Kushner versus Gary Cohn versus Peter Navarro, all this stuff. You know, what was he doing about it? You know, it seemed to be a problem, and he brushed it off and said, "Oh, they're just fighting over who loves me the most," which is a really revealing moment, right? And telling about what he sort of valued and prioritized.
So it's terrific. Thank you so much.